Hi everybody, Matthew Turns here. Today I'm going to review another Beatles album, A Hard Day's Night. Their third UK album was released on July the 10th, 1964. Went to number one on all the British record charts, and in fact it stayed at number one on the Melody Maker chart for 21 straight weeks before it was replaced by Beatles for Sale. Of course, the UK album has the soundtrack to the film of the same name on side one and some additional new songs on side two. The US only got a soundtrack album with the other songs being released on the album Something New around the same time. But it's the UK album that we're going to be discussing today, and it's the first and, in fact, only Beatles album to contain all songs written by Lennon and McCartney. Of course, later on they would go on to have several albums that were all Beatles original tunes, but those would always include songs written by George Harrison or even Ringo Starr on some occasions. But this is all Lennon and McCartney on all 13 tracks on this one. And I think the album represents a step forward for the band. Stylistically, they haven't diverged too far from where they went with the first two albums, but in terms of the quality of the songwriting, I think they take another step forward on this one because the songs on this one are really stellar. Of course, the album opens up with the title track, which was, of course, sung by John Lennon, primarily a John Lennon composed tune, and it's such a great album opener and a great opener for the film. It starts off with that iconic chord, which immediately catches your attention, and it's a song that's got a lot of energy, and I can't listen to the song without thinking of the beginning of the movie, and as the Beatles are running from the fans, and just all that energy and all that excitement, I think really comes through. It's my favorite track on the album and one of my favorite Beatles tracks, period. John sings it so well, and also Paul is great on it on the section that he sings, and I think, as I understand it, that's all John in terms of the songwriting there, but he felt like the notes for that section were a little bit too high, and it would be easier for Paul to sing it, so he gave it to him. But it's just a great tune. It's got very prominent cowbell in there too, which is always a lot of fun. Absolutely one of my favorites. Next track up is I Should Have Known Better, which is another great John Lennon song, early Beatles rock and roll song with a lot of energy to it. Very catchy tune, easy to sing along with. John's vocals on it are double tracked, and he also provides a harmonica, which of course is a staple of some of the early Beatles songs, but very soon after this period would begin to fade from frequent use. Third up is If I Fell, so another John song, three in a row. And John's nicely double tracked at the beginning of this one too, but Paul harmonizes very well throughout. The blend of their voices is great, with Paul taking the high harmony, of course. It's a very beautiful song, a nice little ballad there. Kind of changed the pace a little bit at this point in the album. Of course, this is one of the cases where there's a very clear difference between the stereo, which both copies I have here on vinyl are stereo, and the mono version of the song, because there's a little vocal error, I guess you could say. Paul's voice cracks at one point during the song on the stereo version, and that was fixed for the mono, but they left it as is for whatever reason on the stereo. Maybe they forgot about it. But actually, even though the mono version was the version I first became familiar with, because that was what the original 1987 CD release was, which was the first version and only version that I had for several years. I find that I really like that stereo version with that mistake, just because it adds a little extra humanity to something a little interesting. It's not perfect to it, so I like that touch. But even setting all that aside, it's just a great song and a great melody, and again, a great example of the great harmony vocals that John and Paul did. Fourth up is "I'm Happy Just to Dance with You." And John and Paul felt it was important for George to have a lead vocal in the film, and since they were doing all original songs, that meant that they had to write one for him. Of course, George had written a song on the previous album with the Beatles, his song "Don't Bother Me," but he didn't have any new compositions for this film, so John and Paul provide him with one. And it's an okay song. It's probably my least favorite on the album. It's a nice song, and George sings it well, but it's just not that exciting a track to me. Track 5, "And I Love Her." This actually, I think, maybe in some cases be a better showcase for George than "I'm Happy Just to Dance with You," even though he doesn't get the vocal. Of course, it's a Paul vocal. And it's our first Paul lead vocal of the album already, and it's track 5. Um, but George provided the Spanish guitar part and that little 4-note motif that runs throughout the track and really adds a lot to the track. And Paul himself has admitted that George really helped elevate the track with his contribution on the guitar. And his guitar playing throughout on that Spanish guitar, not only that little lick, but his arpeggios and his picking throughout. I think it's great. It adds a really interesting character to the song, and it's really one of the highlights of the track. In addition to what a great Paul McCartney melody. Now, John did dominate the songwriting on this one, although Paul may not have as much material on here as John, but the material that Paul brings is very, very strong. So he acquits himself well on this album, all things considered, I think. The guitar solo also from George is another thing that I really like on the track. Of course, he really is just following the melody line throughout, but it sounds very nice. It's very effective the way it's played, and he does a nice little lick bringing it out of the guitar solo back into the vocal line. And Ringo is playing bongos and claves on this one, which I think is a very nice touch. It adds a different sort of feel to it. So it's a great track and certainly one of the stronger ones on the album. Next up is "Tell Me Why." So we're picking up the pace again a little bit. Here is another upbeat song. It's a John song again. Great harmonies again from the band. Nothing too much to say about this one other than I do really like it. It's just a nice upbeat, more kind of rockin' tune in the early Beatles style. Last song on side 1 is the single that was released a few months ahead of the album, and of course was a #1 hit all over the world. And because of that, Dick Lester wanted to use it in the film, and that's Paul's song "Cant Buy Me Love." Very effective song. It's one of those songs that begins with the chorus, so it just puts you right into it right from the beginning and catches you right away, just like "She Loves You" does. It just bounces along, has a nice beat, and it's and again, very catchy. Paul sings it incredibly well. I love his vocals on that one. And I also think one of the most effective touches about it is how the music stops when he sings "I Don't Care Too Much for Money, Money Can't Buy Me Love." The music stops for a second, then comes back in. So I think that's very effective, very ear-catching, and it's really no wonder that it was such a huge hit. It's a really great song from Paul. So side 2 starts off with some songs that were written during the period and were considered for the film, but were not included in the film. And first up is "Any Time at All," which is a great tune. It's one of my favorites of theirs. They're I guess one of my favorites of their non-hits, I guess I'll say. It's a song that you don't maybe hear as much, but I think it's really strong. I love that snare hit at the beginning and throughout the song. There's a big strong snare hit that Ringo uses to punctuate things. It's great. This is another song that starts with the chorus, which is great. There's a nice piano part that adds a little extra texture to the song, and then there's the piano solo in the middle eight. It's and that piece I believe was actually written by Paul. The song otherwise was John, but Paul contributed that instrumental middle eight, which is almost like a piano solo in a way that he plays, and there's a cool little guitar lick that I really like too in the chorus. Is anytime at all. That little guitar lick I really like a lot too. So it's a great tune. I think it's an underrated tune, and one of my favorites on the album. Next up, we've got another John song again. John dominating the proceedings here. I'll Cry Instead. This one's got some sort of country-flavored guitar playing in it, which I like a lot. It's again brings another dimension to the music on the album, and I like Paul's little walking bass lick on when John sings "I'll Show You What Your Loving Man Can Do," and kind of walks down there. It's just a nice touch. So it's a good song. It's nothing particularly special, I guess, but I think it's a fun song, and it's a song I enjoy listening to. Next, we get another Paul song and again, Paul, not as many tracks on this album as John, but I do think Paul, the ones that he did bring were very strong, and this is a really strong song. Things We Said Today, some effective alternating between major and minor keys. It's kind of more in the minor key, but it switches to the major key at times. It's a great melody. Paul sings it really well. I can't listen to the song though without thinking of the version on the Live at the Hollywood Bowl album. As I love as he goes into that section. Me, I'm just the lucky kind. When he sings that part on the live version, right before he goes into that, he does a hey, and you hear the girls scream every time he does it. But it's a lot of fun. The studio version is very strong, probably stronger than the live version, but like I said, very effective use of the minor keys and brings another different flavor to the album. Next up is a more kind of a straightforward song from John, but one that I also really like a lot. I think it's just a lot of fun to listen to. That's When I Get Home. It kind of has a really good groove to it, moves along nicely. John sings it very well, kind of that rougher edge John rock and roll voice that I love so much. And Ringo on this one, I love his playing on it, especially when it goes whoa whoa ah, and then he has that big cymbal crash in that part. Really great. Just very effective use of knowing when to punctuate the music by Ringo. He does that a few times on this album. Next up is You Can't Do That, another heavy cowbell song. We got cowbell throughout this entire song. This is one of those songs that always makes me think of that Saturday Night Live's More Cowbell skit, because it's very prominent in this one. I like the little drum lick that Ringo plays throughout too. When he goes in the chorus, that there's one where he is hitting the snare and the kick drum there that's really cool sounding. Really nice harmonies on this one, especially the Everybody's Green. That part has some really nice harmonies. The band again, voices blending together very well. And this one's got a really nice guitar solo on it too. I really enjoyed the solo on this one. And then the album closes with I'll Be Back, which is a little more introspective piece, perhaps. Again, some very, very good harmonies again from John and Paul. John lead vocals again. Yeah, I really like the lyrics to this one a lot too. I think they're very interesting in terms of a relationship that maybe hasn't gone the way he hoped it would, and and in order to try to get this girl, like, it's like he plays hard to get, and it backfires on him. At one point, I love that section of the lyrics in the bridge. I thought that you would realize that if I ran away from you, that you would want me too, but I got a big surprise. Um, the idea of sort of what John is getting across in this one is he's sort of putting on a certain uh, attitude or whatever that he thinks will get this girl, and it completely failed. And so now he's realizing maybe he has to be a bit more real and a bit more sincere. So you have later in the song, I'll try to show that I'm not trying to pretend. So it's a little bit more mature perhaps in the lyrics than some of the other songs from the previous albums, and maybe another one of the signs of how John was wanting to grow lyrically at the time. But I think it's a really good song, and it has a little bit darker tone, so it's an interesting way to end the album. But I do think it's an effective way to end the album, especially to end the album with a song called "I'll Be Back." It's like the Beatles are promising us that we haven't heard the last of them, and they will return, which of course they did later that same year with Beatles for Sale. So my favorite of the early Beatles albums, A Hard Day's Night. It's a strong album, top to finish. Excellent showing from all four members in the performances, but particularly John on the songwriting side, although, like I say, the songs that Paul wrote were all top-notch as well. So you can't pass it up if you like the early Beatles, and even for someone like me who tends to lean a little bit more toward the later Beatles, this is an album that I will not get tired of and have to give it a spin every so often. So there's my thoughts on A Hard Day's Night. Love to hear what you think of the album. If you rate it as one of their top ones, particularly of the early period, how do you think it stacks up against some of the later stuff? Maybe you prefer the earlier stuff over the later stuff. Let me know that in the comments. Love to hear from you. Thanks for watching.